Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Nicholas Hamasevich, and I am the Director of Research and Academic Affairs here at the Korea Economic Institute of America. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our KEI for our academic paper series event today on South Korea as a nuclear exporter. Here in the U.S., South Korea's nuclear energy program has received more attention recently as the United States and South Korea were renegotiating their civil nuclear cooperation deal. In our previous APS report, Do-Yeon Kim and Fred McGoldrick analyzed the difficult issues and tight timeline for negotiating the deal. And just before South Korean President Park Geun-hye visited the United States, it was announced that the United States and South Korea would extend the current deal 2 more years, which gives the two countries a little more time and flexibility to renegotiate the deal. And connected with South Korea's desire for an enhanced nuclear agreement with the United States is the belief that a new agreement will help South Korea offer more to its nuclear export customers. South Korea is looking to build on some of its successes it has had in the nuclear exports in a dynamic nuclear energy market. So we are happy to welcome 2 experts in Chen Kane and Pomper to present their paper and analysis about South Korea's successes in nuclear exports and how South Korea could use its competitive advantages to secure future nuclear energy deals. Dr. Chen Kane is a senior research associate in the Washington, D.C. office of the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, CNS. She focuses on projects related to nuclear energy and proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, with a particular focus on the Middle East. Dr. Kane is a co-founder of the website Arms Control and Regional Security for the Middle East. She also serves as an advisor to the National Nuclear Security Administration. Dr. Kane joined CNS after serving as a fellow in the Non-Proliferation Program at the Center for Strategic International Studies. Previously, she worked for the Israel Atomic Energy Commission, including as the Director of External Affairs. She holds a PhD from Tufts University's Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and an MA and BA from Tel Aviv University. Mr. Pomper is also a senior research associate in the Washington, D.C. office of CNS. His work focuses on nuclear energy, nuclear nonproliferation, nuclear security, and nuclear arms control. He holds a master's degree in international affairs from Columbia University and a master's degree in journalism from Northwestern University. Before joining CNS, he served as editor-in-chief of Arms Control Today from 2003 to 2009. Previously, he was the lead foreign policy reporter for CQ Weekly and Legislate News Service, where he covered the full range of national security issues before Congress. He was also a foreign service officer with the U.S. Information Agency. Please join me in welcoming Chen Kane and Pomper.
Thank you, Nicholas, and to KEI for supporting our research. And when we look at the issue of South Korea, South Korea as a nuclear exporter, we had 3 factors that we based our paper on. The first one was that South Korea set exporting nuclear reactors, nuclear power reactors especially, as a national priority. The second factor was that South Korea is a very good, proven success in building its domestic nuclear energy program and industry. And then the last one, that the fact that South Korea won the UAE deal have many lessons to be learned from, and some issues and competitive advantages that if South Korea will capitalize on and build upon, they might be able to continue and export additional reactors. As a background, South Korean nuclear experience, both domestic and international. Domestically, they operate 23 reactors already. There are 5 nuclear units that are currently under construction, and 4 more are planned to be completed between 2018 to 2021. Internationally, they won the UAE deal that we will expand on here, but they also won, about a few months after they won the UAE deal, also a deal or tender to build Jordan Nuclear Research Center, and it will be the first research reactor in Jordan. And then lastly, They have been providing extensive nuclear training program to nuclear newcomers with assistance to Egypt, Jordan, many Asian countries, but also Kenya and Mongolia. So looking at the UAE deal, just as a background first, in 2009, the UAE and KEPCO signed an agreement to build 4 APR 1400 reactors in Baraka, which is on the shore of the UAE. Other company in the construction and in the consortium, you can see down there, and hopefully also you can see in the bottom what each one of the companies is contributing to the deal. The consortium will be designing and building the 4 reactors. They're going to be based on the unit GORI 3 and 4 in South Korea. They are going also, the consortium is going also to supply the initial fuel load for the reactors and also provide the UAE with technical and educational support, both in the UAE and in South Korea. The first plant is being scheduled to be operational in 2017, with each reactor be operational the following year, up to 4 reactors by 2020. The APR 1400 design is based on US design, right now owned mainly by Westinghouse, and there have been the first reactor, the Baraka 1, has been already, the concrete is being poured already, so the construction is actually going ahead and relatively ahead of time and schedule. With Jordan, this is of course illustration, it's not how it looks yet, it's just started, concrete has been just poured on the ground, but Kerry and Dow is going to sign in 2010, March 2010, 130 million contract with Jordan to build the construct their first research reactor. South Korea is going to provide 3.5 years of the fuel, for the first 3.5 years the fuel load, and also provide training for Jordanian both in South Korea and in Jordan. The reactor is going to be built in JUST, Jordan University for Science and Technology. The excavation started already in 2012, and it's been expected to be online by 2015. Just as a background, it's a 5 megawatt reactor. It's upgradable to 10 megawatt reactor, and it's based on Anhara's Korean research reactor. South Korea also agreed to finance the reactors, or most of the construction, with 70 million soft loan. So if we're looking on the UAE contract, and by far the UAE contract is most significant if you look on compare it to the Jordanian one, mainly because of the amount of money involved, and also the precedent of the fact that it's going to be South Korea's first export of nuclear reactor. And so there are 5 kinds of factors that influence and promoted the fact that the South Korea actually won the deal. And we will go on under each one of those and explain why those facilitated the fact that South Korea won the UAE deal. So first, for the political factor, there is important to note that the UAE and South Korea had already, prior to winning the agreement in 2009, they had already established cooperation in strategic sectors between them, and especially South Korea in the UAE, in areas of oil production, finance, healthcare, trade, and infrastructure. So the relationship did not start from scratch. There was already established relations, and South Korean working in the UAE successfully in mega projects, which are very important when you look on nuclear reactor project, which is a span of 60 years of a contract sometimes. There is also important to know that South Korea employed many diplomatic channels to promote during the negotiation. Then the President Lee visited 5 times during the negotiation time, the UAE to promote the negotiations. And this is something very typical. If you remember, Sarkozy was doing also shuttle diplomacy in the Middle East and especially the UAE to try to promote the French Arriva bid. So the fact that CAPCO had the government support and especially the president's support was very important. The fact that the president before and was the CEO of Hyundai, that was part, as you saw, part of the consortium, also added a lot of credibility to the bid and to the negotiation. And then there is also diplomatic carrots. And usually those carrots are not a direct part or obvious part of the deal, but they have been offered. And just as anecdote, for example, when Sarkozy came to the UAE, tried to promote the French Arriva contract, he offered to build a Louvre at the UAE, which is actually being built right now, being constructed. So the diplomatic carrots that were exchanged between the UAE and South Korea as a result of the contract are involving military exchange with special forces from South Korea training UAE special forces for 2 years. So you have about 300 special forces, Korean special forces, living in the UAE for 2 years and training the UAE special forces. There was also some technology exchanges, as well as military, and some cooperation on technology transfer, communication, and training. And then the fact that the ROK has close relations with the US was also playing an important role. And the UAE was very interested to continue to keep the good relations with the US, which are UAE main security benefactor. But I didn't want to get with the US directly into 60 years of negotiation and contract on nuclear issues that, at least the way that they perceive it, is more complicated, and a lot of political baggage is being brought into the nuclear deal. So they were happy to do it directly with South Korea, that is not considered US emissary in the region, in the Middle East. But on the other hand, they had to the fact that they could do it based on US technology, because the APR 1400 is based on US technology, and with Westinghouse in the consortium, so the fact that the US wasn't part of the consortium, but they didn't have to deal directly with the US on the contract itself, was actually very beneficial from the UAE standpoint. So then we move into the technical factors. There are, ROK is being known as a leader in reactor reliability. CAPCO renowned for having the highest capacity factor compared to also, and the lowest unplanned shutdown. And you can see from the figure here, South Korea is the green one. And this is the average of outage time and operation during the operational cycle of a reactor between all the other suppliers, main suppliers as well. And then the ability of South Korea to initiate and complete project quickly. If you look and if you compare South Korea ability to build reactors, they're doing it faster than anyone else. The amount of the time that it took South Korea to finish on average their reactor is 4.4 years. And this is compared to, let me first I can get in. So the 5 nuclear power plants that got online in 2010, their average time of construction was 9.5 years. For the 7 nuclear power plants that got online in 2011, it took 3.8 years. So the fact that South Korea managed to build reactor fast doesn't only say that it's going to have electricity being produced faster, but it's also that the cost is lower, because what usually is the cost during construction is the finance and the interest. So if you do it faster, it's actually cheaper as well. So there is the benefit of that was very important to the UAE that wanted to get energy as fast as they can, as possibly cheaper, if that will be a plus. Oops. And then the business model that CAPCO adopted with the consortium was very attractive to the UAE. First, they are experienced the way that they work already together within South Korea for many years. If you compare it to, for example, the French bid, Total, Areva, and EDF did not work together in the past as well, and also some partners in that bid just came later on, so they were not part of the initial French bid. So the fact that KEPCO came with a set number of companies that all of them experienced and worked well in the past was very attractive to the UAE. They're also adaptable in the sense that there are some aspects in the UAE that the UAE during the bid wanted to change, and KEPCO was willing to do it and to be adaptable to what the UAE is interested in. And also the way that the risk model that KEPCO adopted was also very attractive to the UAE, because in the consortium and in the bid, KEPCO borne all the risks. So, and if you compare it, for example, to a Areva bid, it was divided in between the three members of the consortium. Now, whenever you have a contract, you always prefer to deal with one person, and there will be one address. And that was very attractive also in the KEPCO consortium, but that was not in the other bid. And then there was, for the UAE as a newcomer that doesn't have the capabilities, the human resources, and the education and support for a new nuclear energy program, one of the most important criteria was to support their human resources, both in country and outside. So, for example, both training in the UAE and establishing different educational program at the UAE, but also to take people to South Korea and train them in South Korea. The fourth factor is the financial factors. So, as we mentioned before, because of the relatively quick execution, in general, South Korea reactors construction is cheaper. But not also cheaper, it's also that the amount that they offer as the bid was much, much lower than compared to the other ones. And has not been published yet what is the final number that was offered by the other bids, for example, Areva and Hitachi, as the other bids, but some say that the South Korea was as much as half as the other bidders. And it should be noted that it actually was also criticized, the fact that the bid was so low, relatively, some criticized it within South Korea as unsustainable economically. But we will get to that a little bit after that. So they also, and on top of the relatively low price, South Korea also offered a very attractive financing package. The deal was fixed price, meaning that fluctuation in other areas were not going to influence the price. There was very low interest rate, and also include investment, direct loan, and external debt guarantees. And then the last factors are cultural factors. The countries actually, which doesn't seem obvious at the beginning, but actually found very similar cultural affiliation. The fact that both of them are sharing colonialism in the past. Both of them are newly developed countries, and both of them are struggling between tradition to development and modernization. And then also the UAE very appreciated the South Korean commitment to the bid and trying to win the bid, that during the negotiation they established they call it a war room on the basement of KEPCO in Seoul, where executives, about 50 to 70 executives, were sitting and planning together for many, many months how to try to sell the bid and how to improve it. So if we look to conclude, if we look on the UAE deal and why South Korea won, what were the competitive advantages that facilitated the South Korean winning the deal, was first that there was distinct competitive advantage in terms of low cost, high credibility, and high performance. The fact that the government supported it, including the president personally several times during the negotiation. There was very attractive financial package. And last, the US technology provided at low cost but also at the same time U.S. tacit agreement to the deal, and by that there is no concern within the UAE to upset or to be disconnected from the U.S., which are their main security benefactors. And now my colleague as Pomper will continue.
Thanks, Chen, and thanks to KEI for having us. I'm going to talk a little bit about we've talked about sort of what happened right in the UAE deal. What does this mean kind of going forward? There's no signal on the TV? Okay. What are the export plans for Korea going forward? It's been much publicized. In 2010, the then Ministry of Knowledge and Economy set a goal of capturing 20% of the world market in the next 2 decades. That would be about 80 reactors, 4 units a year, talking about $400 billion worth of sales. Frankly, this was pretty optimistic to begin with, and it's been scaled back following Fukushima, the global financial crisis, and the shortages of qualified personnel in Korea. I mean, frankly, there just aren't enough people to build this many reactors in Korea right now. So the more realistic expectation that some people in the nuclear industry in Korea are saying are trying to build 10 nuclear plants by 2030. That's plants as opposed to reactors, which is still more than 10 reactors. Korea signed nuclear cooperation agreements with 27 states. This is kind of the first step before you actually build the reactors, to have a government-to-government agreement. And it hopes to secure some additional contracts in places like India, Vietnam, Poland, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, China, and the United States. But there's a number of challenges that Korea faces. I'll go into them in detail, but these are finance, its reliance on the U.S., issues about safety, and again, shortages of personnel that are needed. In terms of finance, as Ken said, part of the attraction in the UAE deal was that the reactor price, the financing, and the low profit margin Korea was willing to accept in this situation. But as one industry executive said, the UAE financial offer is the golden case that will not happen again. This was kind of let's make a really low price right now to get Korea's foot in the door when it comes to nuclear sales, to get people comfortable with, but you can't really afford to keep doing that. On the other hand, potential customers, of course, will want to get the same deal, so you're starting off at a disadvantage in the negotiations. You also have some suppliers like Russia and China, which are state-owned companies, which may not even be really making money, but just looking to create jobs in their nuclear complexes, driving the prices down. If you look at the deal in Turkey particularly, Russia's building what's known as a build, own, operate model of reactors, where basically Russia takes all the risk of building the reactor and operating it. Turkey just pays a price for the electricity that comes out, a price that's frankly pretty low. And the indications are that Russia was basically willing to do this for geostrategic reasons. It wanted to maintain its relationship with Turkey, particularly its gas exports to Turkey, so it was willing to not make a lot of money on the nuclear deal. So you're competing against countries that aren't really doing this on economic terms. As Ken said, the U.S. reliance on the U.S. ties were an advantage in the UAE deal, but it also comes with vulnerabilities. Right now, any disruption in the nuclear trade between the between Korea and the United States would affect Korea's exports. And we saw this as we approached this recent end of the current nuclear cooperation agreement, and we got this extension. There's a lot of anxiety about what this would mean. There's political reasons. I'll go into more detail, but the United States is going to have a strong say over South Korea's nuclear power plant exports under any scenario going forward. And there are technologies that South Korea has not mastered that are still patented by U.S. companies, particularly Westinghouse. Okay, legally, the APR, as Ken indicated, the APR 1400 is based on a Westinghouse design. And that means that U.S. approval is required for the re-export of the reactor under Sections 123 and 131 of the Atomic Energy Act. Westinghouse would also likely need to seek what's called a Part 810 authorization before it and its employees can conduct nuclear-related business abroad. That's about providing U.S. technology and to other countries. In addition, there's pending regulations that would require the re-export of any major U.S. origin nuclear reactor components would only happen if there's a ratification of a nuclear cooperation agreement between the U.S. and the importing country. I mean, one of the things that allowed the UAE deal to go forward is the U.S. had reached a 123 agreement with the UAE beforehand. In addition, there's been a lot of talk about the enrichment and reprocessing aspects of the U.S.-South Korean nuclear cooperation negotiations. Just to reiterate, in the talks, Korea wants a U.S. advance consent for what's known as pyroprocessing, which is a form of spent fuel reprocessing, but the U.S. doesn't want to grant permission for Korea to do that with U.S. origin fuel. Now, I'll leave that aside in terms of how that affects Korea domestically, but what does that mean for exports? There are some in Korea who think, well, it would be great if Korea could supply, start up this pyroprocessing service and then supply it to other countries. This would help South Korea's exports. Obviously, most countries don't want to deal with their spent fuel. If they could ship it to someone else and they could manage it, this would be a great boon. I mean, this is one of the offers that the Russians, for instance, make on their reactor sales is if we ship you the fuel for our reactors, we'll take it back and you won't have to really deal with it anymore. Frankly, though, I don't think this is going to be feasible in Korea. I mean, Korea has enough political problems trying to deal with its own spent fuel. I can't imagine how people would react if they tried to import other countries' spent fuel. If you look at enrichment, there's some folks in Korea that think they can make both direct profits from selling enrichment services, and you could get additional profits because it would encourage countries to say that you've got a full service plan for the front end of the market. In other words, you could provide all the fuel, the enrichment, and so on. For those who don't follow the nuclear things too closely, you've got, there's a number of different elements before you put fuel in a reactor. You have to mine the uranium, you have to convert it into a form that can be enriched, then you have to enrich it, and then you have to fabricate it into the fuel for the reactors. Right now, Korea only has a stage where you can fabricate the fuel for the reactors. Otherwise, other companies and other countries do the other three stages. And Korea doesn't have uranium it can mine sufficiently. Some in Korea would like Korea to have the enrichment stage, which is now usually in the U.S. and Europe and Russia. But it doesn't have the technology to do so, and the existing suppliers have not expressed a willingness to transfer those technologies to South Korea. So it would either have to develop its own technologies, which has not proven to be a very good idea for countries like Japan that have tried it, or it would somehow have to convince these countries to do it. It's also, the enrichment market is a very small market. The entire enrichment market, I've sort of in a rough estimate, is about the same cost as one nuclear reactor. It's about $5 billion a year, more or less. So you're only getting a small slice of that if you were able to get into the market. It's also the way that things actually work in the front end of the market is that utilities usually go out and buy all these services themselves. They'll contract to one company for the mining, they'll contract to another company for the conversion, another company for the enrichment, and another for the fabrication. They don't buy it all from the end person, or they like to have more control over the process themselves. So unless you get into the kind of build, own, operate model that Russia's engaged in, which is not very profitable, you don't really have a need to do this kind of service. You can South Korea could basically go and get these services on the commercial market, and that's what the UAE did. It went and got these services on the commercial market. In terms of the availability of resources, as I indicated earlier, a key one's personnel. You don't have enough Korean personnel to both deal with the UAE plants and to deal with the Korean plants that are under construction, let alone new reactors. And so the availability of personnel for exports will be heavily influenced by what South Korea decides to do domestically beyond the plants that are already kind of under construction right now. There's a clear need to partner with other countries that may have more resources, for instance, U.S. or Japan, both of which have engineers and other people that are, may not, especially in Japan, it's got a lot of people who are sort of sitting around idle right now. Then there's safety questions. There's been a number of safety scandals in South Korea in the last couple of years. You had some cracks in the in control rods, and there was a forgery of parts in certain reactors in Korea. More than 15 unplanned shutdowns in Korea. And this is after, one of the advantages that South Korea has had all along in this, in terms of reputation and sales, was that it was able to operate reactors without a lot of safety problems and this high capacity factor, which means the amount of time it's operating. But with these kind of problems, you're having more shutdowns and less, it's hurting South Korea's reputation for safety. We've had the heads of KEPCO and KHNP who run the nuclear plants resign because of these scandals. And WANO, which is the World Association of Nuclear Operators, which is an industry group that's kind of self-regulating, has insisted on having a safety regulation inspection this fall because of South Korea's problems with safety. So that's an indication that this is a serious problem. South Korea is taking it seriously. It's underwent safety reviews by the domestically and IAE after Fukushima, and has pledged $1 billion over 5 years for nuclear safety. So what are some of the future deal possibilities? Ken and I think the Middle East is a particularly attractive market for South Korea. Obviously, it's got 2 deals there already, which gives you some evidence of that. But it's also got other factors that make it particularly attractive for South Korea. South Korea has a lot of experience and prominence in running and operating mega projects in the region. And these are not nuclear projects, but they're other projects involving construction, desalination, and so on. Korea has the experience of adapting the APR 1400 to the specific security and geographic characteristics, training, quality assurance, and grid upgrade support that's required in the region. And the UAE deal could lead to more contracts and long-term profit. There's follow-on contracts that are being discussed with Korea for other aspects of dealing with the reactors, and there are hints that Korea would be the supplier of future reactors in the UAE. There's an advantage in only having one type of reactor in the country, in that you only have to deal with one reactor type for safety and regulation, and so on. So finally, our recommendations going forward for South Korea. In terms of the long-term nuclear cooperation agreement with the U.S., we'd say that all this debate about pyroprocessing enrichment is less important than finding a win-win solution with the U.S. to boost South Korea exports. There's a lot of areas the 2 countries can cooperate on that have nothing to do with enrichment and reprocessing, and getting a deal is the most important thing. To have this stability, to have this connection, to have that tie to the security and Westinghouse and so on. Korea has some options for strengthening its competitive advantages. Can use nuclear energy for desalination, work on training. It can invest in the construction of additional centrifuge capacity at existing enrichment plants, or buy equity in them to have that access to enrichment without trying to compete directly with existing suppliers. It can look at small modular reactors, and particularly carries smart reactors for export to small countries. These are reactors with less capacity, smaller power than typical reactors, which run about 1,000 megawatts. These are often about 300 megawatts. And they may be better designed for countries whose grids are less reliable, for particular functions like desalination, or that are kind of offline. You should concentrate on countries, given the financing issues, concentrate on countries that can afford nuclear energy, especially in the Middle East, in exchange for greater fossil fuel security. Countries like UAE, you can get gas or oil in return for some of this nuclear energy trades. Move quickly and decisively to take action regarding safety, and to think long term. Cutting profit margins in the short term can be compensated in future deals and in other realms. Think about the bigger picture. And with that, we're happy to take your questions.
All right, well, thank you both. We have microphones, so if you can just raise your hand, state your name and organization, and ask a question. We have a lot of good information up there and a lot of interesting topics. So first question, yes, right over here. Microphone's there to your left.
I'm Stephanie Cook from Nuclear Intelligence Weekly. Miles, I wanted to get the third point on your the point about the difficulty of exporting without a 1, 2, 3 deal. The slide went by so fast, but maybe I could get that afterwards. But yep. In the meantime, I just wanted to clarify. You're saying that basically, if it's a Westinghouse reactor, anything related to the export of Westinghouse technology, even if it's directly from Korea to the UAE, without a 1, 2, 3 agreement, can't happen?
Yeah, you just
if the pending regulations are approved, that will be the case, and basically in practice now.
If the pending
regulations.
Which regulations are?
There's regulations pending by the Energy Department and dealing with specific and general authorizations that would
basically preclude anything going from Korea to the 1, 2, 3. I mean, sorry, to the UAE. And then, is there any chance, just looking beyond Korea to other countries? I'm just trying to think how that might work. But any Westinghouse technology that might be exported as part of a Korean deal, say from France, that involves Westinghouse.
French are not. French cut their ties, their intellectual property ties to Westinghouse in the 80s.
It's not an issue on any other, yeah. Do you know when these new rules, these DOE rules, are expected to be promulgated?
They're planning to do it during March. Obviously, it didn't happen still, so it's pending, and they're really trying. The NNSA really trying to pass it as fast as they can. Mm-hmm. And just to mention, you mentioned other suppliers. China might have the same constraints,
right?
Both from Westinghouse and Areva. Uh-huh. Although they claim that some of their reactor design are not bound by intellectual property, but depends also what those companies will claim.
Right.
Yes, yes, right here on the side.
Hi, Bill Freeberg from Platts Nuclear Next Week. In continuation of that, does what other countries could there be a similar problem with, such as UAE? And I'm thinking of Saudi Arabia probably. That if the Koreans would like to participate in the Saudi tender that's upcoming, wouldn't we need a 1, 2, 3 agreement for them to do so? And what are the prospects for that as you see it? And what countries other than Saudi Arabia do you think are ripe for exports next?
I'll take that.
At least if we speak about the Middle East, so Saudi Arabia and also Jordan, although Jordan was not, South Korea was not shortlisted in the Jordanian bid. It was Russian and the ATMEA, which is consortium between French and Japan. But I will claim that right now Jordan is in a crossroad and might reopen the bid in one point or the other. There are many issues within the Jordanian energy program, and if they are going to open it and South Korea might rejoin, that would be an issue because Jordan also did not sign a 1, 2, 3 agreement with the U.S. With Saudi Arabia, you're right. They have not signed yet 1, 2, 3 agreement with the U.S., but they are negotiating, and I think relatively in a good pace.
Vietnam would be the other one.
Right.
What are the advantages of trying to for South Korea in Vietnam? I mean, would that, and how would they try and get on in that process?
I think it's obviously not some of the political. I mean, there's some of the political in that they're tied to the U.S. and Vietnam. I think would like to diversify from having just Russian ties. But I think mainly, the kind of cost advantages and those kind of things, right. Training and so on.
Okay. Yes, Florence.
Florence Lowley from Global America Business Institute. Question for Miles. Couple questions and comment actually. On your comment about ENR part, you only highlight for enrichment part. You said Korea's profit gaining and selling it as a full package. But from Korean perspective, I think they're looking at more as energy security. As Korea try to go 50% of its energy source from the nuclear, so it's more of energy security more than trying to sell it as a full package for enrichment. On your conclusion part, you said supportive or agreement on a multilateral approach. Are you talking about just the existing enrichment companies or new construction? Would you support the new construction of the enrichment going multilateral, or would you just support the investment of share stocks in existing enrichment company? And you also mentioned about win-win situation. Can you be specific? What would be the win-win situation for both nations? Thank you.
Well, on the enrichment issues, the reason because I was focusing on exports, I didn't deal with energy security issues, but I also don't think it's necessary for energy security. When Korea's operated reactors for 30 years, it never had a supply interruption. It's not. I don't see the security issue. I mean, there's lots of ways to deal with energy security and security of supply that don't involve constructing enrichment facilities. A lot of countries in the world don't have enrichment facilities and operate nuclear power plants. You can do it by investing, which Korea's already done in some places in certain plants. You have long-term contracts. Most contracts in the enrichment industry are now about 10 years. And you could have a longer contract if you wanted. I'm sure companies would be happy to sign up for that. You can stockpile enriched uranium hexafluoride if you wanted. I mean, it's just a very expensive way to do that. And it doesn't seem to be a very good use of limited, when you're trying to not have enough people to work in your industry already, to start a whole new project doesn't seem to be a very wise use of resources. The second question was about the multilateral. The problem with the multilateral approach, the black box idea, there's a lot of people who say, how secure is a black box? So what does it actually get you in terms of security? But even leaving that aside, whose technology are you going to use? There's no interest on the part of existing suppliers to provide Korea with the technology. So in that case, what does a multilateral facility get you? You have to have Korean technology, which means that the multilateral thing is pointless.
So what you said in your presentation is then just invest in share in the existing.
Right. There's also a glut in the enrichment market right now. I mean, so there's not this demand for enrichment capacity. I mean, maybe 5 years ago when people were gung ho on this nuclear renaissance idea, maybe it made sense, but it doesn't now, and it probably won't be for the foreseeable future, especially once we start exporting shale gas. And what's the third point?
What is the specific points of how could both sides get the
the win-win. We could cooperate on sort of, for instance, these SMRs and the small and modular reactors. Financing is clearly key for Korea. Could use help on, working with the U.S. Exim Bank and developing its own financing capabilities. Some of the safety issues dealing with spent fuel, both in Korea and outside of Korea. And, what are we going to do about the UAE spent fuel, for instance? So there's a lot of other areas that aren't involving fuel cycle technologies. Training, obviously. I mean, there's a lot of, I think in the paper we list 8 or 9 of them, but there's a lot, this is the areas that seem to be kind of missed by all the emphasis on our technologies.
Yeah, Lynn?
Hi, this question is from Timothy Westmeyer via Twitter. He has asked if Reports say that Tom Countryman is replacing Robert Einhorn. Will this new U.S. 123 negotiator change pace or end results of talks?
I think U.S. policy is probably set at levels that are higher than either Bob Einhorn or Tom Countryman, and given that Tom Countryman was already the Assistant Secretary of State for Nonproliferation, I assume he was on board with the policy.
Yes, over here. Question over here.
Thank you very much. Steve Goldberg, Argonne. Miles, very good presentation. Same with Dr. Kane as well. I'd like to sort of go, and prospectively going forward, to your analysis. You make a point about that Korea would like to make decisions going forward that are more based on business principles, less on subsidies. If that's the case, did you at all think about what kind of scale they would need to develop for production purposes? So from overnight cost for their new APRs there, they could go head-to-head with the Chinese and Rosetta and with the Russians. And second of all, in terms of their oil financing, obviously they gave tremendous credits to the deal with UAE. Is that something that is that scalable to other deals going forward, or is that a one-off with the accent with Korea? So both of those would have major dynamic impacts on whether Korea could go head-to-head with China, for example.
I'll talk a little bit and then Ken can chime in. I think, China, we don't really have a lot of experience to go on, right? And the only exports they've done are to Pakistan, which is kind of a sui generis kind of case. And I suspect, though, that we'll have, both with the Russians and the Chinese, there's certain prices that they won't be able to meet. And if you look at the Turkey deal, the Koreans walked away from that because the price was just, even given what they did in the UAE, it just wasn't any money. Not to mention the financing situation. So you get to a certain point, I don't think, it's not a matter of, as we said, Korea makes a very competitive product. So it's not the question of lowering the product price. If you're willing to sacrifice your profit margin or even take losses for other political goals, and how do you compete against that? On financing, they were pretty stretched on this deal. So that's clearly part of the reason that Westinghouse has gone from a $200 million stake to a $2 billion stake is that they could get an Exim bank guarantee for $2 billion. Talking about Florence's question, one of the recommendations would be to find ways to boost your financing. Maybe the U.S. there can be some kind of joint mechanism or to do that in those situations, or at least assistance in how to do that.
And one of my favorite footnotes in this paper is actually footnote number 21, just because it compared the overnight cost of all the different kinds of construction of reactors. And actually, I was surprised by that, but actually the APR 1400 in Korea is the cheapest, compared even to a Chinese reactor in China, which I found is interesting. Now, how much South Korea APR will cost to the UAE, it's still to be seen, but they evaluate it going to be about 30 to 40% more than APR 1400 in Korea, which is still very attractive price. About China exporting, from what I understand right now, China is suffering because of the amount of reactors being constructed, which is over 20, I think, in China. They're suffering with the same issue of personnel. The question, of course, there are more Chinese in China, but you need also experienced and qualified personnel to build reactors and to be regulators and to be supervisors and to be manager. So when they're going to export or start export, and my assumption is not going to start. They're not going to have a reactor ready to be export for at least 10 to 15 years. The question, will they be able actually to have the people to support construction outside China with the pace that they are going domestically?
I guess one thing I did think in terms of the scale that we mentioned in the paper is what's interesting here is the involvement of Samsung, and that could affect your ability to scale up having someone, another major company involved?
We'll go here and then we'll come back to you.
Hi, good discussion. Andrew Patterson with the Atlantic Council. Miles, you made an offhanded rhetorical question, which was, how do you compete with a vendor group that is willing to politically subsidize and compete in ways that are other than on cost? You can by building a more reliable reactor. In other words, if the Russians are offering a less reliable reactor at half the cost of an APR 1400, they aren't. But you can compete against what you offered as a rhetorical question, I would submit.
Well, look at Turkey, though.
Well, Turkey remains to be seen. Is that deal signed yet?
The Turkey, yes. The Russian 4 reactors is signed, and now they're negotiating with China and, with French and Japan on Atmea.
Yeah.
That they already in a very advanced stage of negotiation. What surprised me is that French and Japan agree also on BOO scheme with very actually lower cost of energy per kilowatt, which is 10 cents, which is very, very low.
Right.
But I think Japan is want to prove and need to make this deal right and happen, and may be willing to bear the cost, but that's not going to be economic for either Russia and China and Japan, and French and Japan if that's going forward. The first deal is going forward. We will see still if Rosatom is not willing to participate in that deal.
Right.
The Russian government strike the deal for political and energy reasons other than nuclear, but Rosatom need to actually execute it. And the question, will they do it on time in a safety matter without cutting costs? Because they are losing money on this entire venture.
Right.
I mean, the hard part for Korea in terms of, if you look at the global, and we didn't talk sort of the global nuclear picture, but partly because of what's happened in shale gas in the U.S., you've got, in terms of where energy is growing, you've got, China, which is kind of a closed market to anyone. You've got Westinghouse maybe in there, but it's basically the Chinese are building their own reactors, a few French things, but it's not a big opportunity for Korea right now. And then, Europe and the United States are basically not building a lot of reactors. And so you've got these kind of marginal places that are building reactors aside from a couple of places like the UAE and Saudi. The Russians want to build reactors in Bangladesh and Belarus, and these are not places Korea really wants to build reactors. So there's not a lot of playing room to compete in, I think.
Right. So that leads to the question: are we really competing on cost, or are there other larger factors, including sovereign backing and risk handling in the deal, rather than just overnight capital costs?
I think it would be both. I think it depends who is the buyer and what will be attractive to them, and what's also their financial capacity to actually finance the deal by themselves. If you look in the UAE, you look on Saudi Arabia, money is not the issue. So getting a better finance deal is attractive but not essential. While most of the other countries, they're looking for nuclear energy. If you don't offer full finance, they cannot afford it. And I think if you look on the other end, on South Korea and their limited capacity to actually build more reactor because of issues of personnel and ability to finance, they can cherry pick, and they should cherry pick and pick up only the ones that can afford it. Otherwise, it's not going to be economically feasible, and it's going to stretch them financially and in personnel capacity.
I guess one thing we didn't really cover in here, which is also another export possibility for Korea, is, and maybe more so than the actual full plants, or some of is the replacement market, which Korea started to really do some good sales in the United States and elsewhere. So there may be more opportunities in some ways in steam generators and those kind of things.
Yes, back here.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions. You mentioned Westinghouse having its stake going from $200 million to $2 billion. You mean they actually have an equity stake in the company that's running the project?
Their share of the cost of the.
Yeah, but I wondered. Well, I'll tell you why. Because
they're being paid $2 billion. That's what.
They're being paid $2 billion via this. Okay, that's fine. But the question is, the sort of headline price of this project is $23 billion. We know it's going to cost a lot more than that, and I wondered if you had an estimate. And also, What I understand about this project is that as the costs escalate, it's the UAE that's digging into its pockets and paying for it, not the Koreans. And the Koreans have no equity stake in the company that's been set up to run the project. At least I don't think that's been settled, but you may have more information about that, and I'd be interested if you do, or if you did.
About the equity, actually Korean companies in Korea was asked to join. They're still, I think, negotiated, and still Korea need to decide if they want or no. I think in many ways they are willing to participate in that. They will be interested to join that because they see a possibility for actually profit on the long run. They also want to facilitate future deals and dependency between the UAE and Korea in the sense that UAE will sign with them the additional reactors. The unpublished numbers that the UAE was mentioning is up to 16 reactors. So that's very attractive opportunity. So the South Korea is willing to invest a little bit more upfront with maybe the opportunity to get more deals in the future.
And part of the UAE idea is that maybe they won't just be for the UAE, it may be exporting power to other countries.
I understand that, but do you know does anybody have an idea of what the ultimate price of this project is, what the price tag will be?
No, but so far it seems that it's going actually faster than estimate time. So
they don't fight over stuff. They have problems, like they had to apparently relay the base mat. And, they just go to the UAE and the UAE says, okay, and they take the money out of their pocket.
That's
a lot of
nice.
countries don't have that kind of money in there. I mean, look at Finland. If that happened in Finland, they end up in court, and that's why the project's so delayed. Which in many ways makes this project in the UAE a model project, but that's because they have the cash.
Right, and that's why we say South Korea should be very selective of where they go.
Yeah, that would be the understanding.
Yes, over here.
Hi, Mrs. Sun from the State Department. Dr. Kane, you mentioned that the leadership in South Korea was very important to cutting the UAE deal, and we visited 5 times. I'm wondering now, with Park Geun-hye as president, do you see any potential shift in direction regarding the RK nuclear energy industry, and then even just the reshuffling of the Trade and Finance Ministry, what effect that might have on long-term direction?
Miles can speak more about the domestic issue of Korea, but I think from what I heard so far, Park put export of nuclear energy as a higher degree than development of domestic energy program, and I think we should wait until August when they publish their energy strategy for the next 20-25 years and see what their priorities. I think Park is still looking on this issue. It's a big decision. It's a big decision that's going to influence the next more than 20 to 50 years. Whatever you decide now about how to go domestically, going to influence your energy security, energy mix, and things like that. So I think it's still debated within South Korea, and I think we need to look around August when they publish their energy strategic plans.
Well, if you look at what they were talking about with the U.S., she was talking about with the president when she was here, I mean, she had 3 goals she laid out, which are, I think very pragmatic goals. I mean, one was dealing with the immediate spent fuel problem in South Korea. It's, the fact that pools are filling up. Secondly, having a stable supply of fuel for the reactors. And third, dealing with exports. So clearly she's made exports a priority. But I think those are, if you get rid of some of the whole politics that's around, these are actually things that the U.S. and South Korea can find agreement on. I think she's taking a pragmatic way to deal with it, which is, hopefully may lead to some progress in the negotiations, which I think is pretty important.
And the organization of ministries?
I think I'm still trying to figure out how that's affecting things. I'm actually going to Korea in a few weeks, and maybe I'll know more then. But, I mean, the question that came up immediately was, they took the Safety and Security Commission, which was taken out to be autonomous and independent and sort of modeled on the NRC, and they stuck it under another ministry. So,
And now it's back.
Is it back again?
It's back again. Really?
Okay, good. Well, I mean, that was a concern immediately.
So it's back a while because a lot of uprise. So
Yeah, I mean that's obviously given, as we said, the importance of safety in both domestically and in terms of for popular support and then for export. It's really key to have an independent. As we saw in Japan, key to have an independent regulator. It's going to be key to the reputation of South Korea's reactors going forward.
Other questions?
Jack Ransahoff, Return Products. Are you going to complete the fuel cycle in Korea or in the host country? Talking about processing spent fuel.
Well, that's first of all, Korea has to figure out what it wants to do with its own spent fuel. I mean, I think if you look at the UAE deal, the UAE was, said it's not going to engage in enrichment or reprocessing, and the US-UAE 123 agreement provides the opportunity for that spent fuel to go to France or the UK for reprocessing. It's not clear if the UAE is going to take advantage of that. Part of the reason that they don't, they've tried to avoid having U.S. contractors like USEC involved in the fuels, the possibility that they might be able to, and I'm not sure how this would work in terms of the 123 agreements anyway, if that would actually work or not, but to possibly send the fuel to Russia for processing. So I think, they're pretty good negotiators. They're trying to get the best deal they can on this stuff. But there's also not a rush right now. I mean, they haven't even built the plants yet. So they've got 20 years of operation of the plants once they're operating. Then dry cast, put them in pools. Then you've got dry cast storage after that, and there's a lot of room in the desert. So it's not something they have to figure out tomorrow.
And they're actually working relatively, I must say that the UAE does all the right things in the right order, and they're trying to show that actually they're very committed both on safety, security, but also on waste. And right now they do the strategic study of how to address the waste management, both short-term and long-term. So they're still looking at these issues, and if not, I think they will publish it in the next half a year to a year.
And the UAE's got, they just sort of imported the best talent in the field. I mean, they hired a former NRC commissioner to run their regulator. They have Hans Blix on their international board. So, they're thinking these things through. I'm sure they'll come up with some certainly industry best practices in this regard.
Okay. Alan up here. I have a question.
Alan on Global American Business Institute. As you mentioned in your presentation, purchase of nuclear fuel generally contract out the different parts of the front end services to different countries, different companies, suppliers. Some suppliers will bundle services. Russia, for example, has that been a selling point for any of Russia's customers in the past, and is that potentially a selling point for any nuclear newcomer countries, as you mentioned in your presentation?
Well, certainly in the past. The thing is, in the past, most of Russia's customers didn't have a choice. When they were Soviet customers who, you get one type of reactor, you get one type of fuel. And so that market's changing a little bit. If you look at some of the things in Eastern Europe, the Czechs and other countries are starting to look at alternatives to just buying the whole package from the Russians. But if you did this kind of BLO model, perhaps, then it would be of interest, because then they're building and operating a reactor. They can decide who they're going to get the fuel from, and you can guess who that's going to be if you're the company that's operating. But I'm not sure. We'll see if that is a sustainable model. I have my doubts.
And at least if we look again in the Middle East as a potential market for South Korea, most Middle Eastern countries prefer to diversify. They don't trust suppliers, and especially the ones that tie to the U.S., because they don't know what will happen, and they prefer to diversify. And you can see the UAE, when they all have all the enrichment services, they contract with 7 different companies for different enrichment, the mining, the uranium, to buy the uranium, and they cover everywhere. They cover Canadian, the American, Russian, French. They really want to diversify and not to put all the eggs in one basket.
It's not just economic. I mean, you got to realize, you think about these countries. UAE is a very small country. It's across the Gulf from Iran. It wants as many friends who are going to rush to its defense as possible. And part of the incentive, the special forces agreement with the Koreans, was a selling point, because that means there's one more country there. The French have already had a base. The U.S. has a base there. The more security protectors they can get, these are rich guys who want other people to defend them. And this is a way to get that.
Yes, over here.
The relationship with Iran, between the UAE and Iran. I'm looking at a story, the Fars news agency, Iranian news agency. Iran, South Korea stress expansion of ties. Visiting Parliamentarian Foreign Affairs Committee Chen was in Tehran yesterday, and they're talking about expanding their ties. Quote, "We hope to see further progress in the growing trend of relations and cooperation between Iran and South Korea." So how does that play into it?
I don't take that seriously.
You don't take that seriously?
I think you can ask our friend who's here from the State Department, but I give the State Department about half an hour to have someone in the embassy into the South Korean government protesting this. The South Koreans have been coming along with the sanctions and so on. I mean, I think they're good allies of the United States, and they're not going to, there's not enough, they have interest in energy and all those kind of things, but they know in the end where their security interests lie.
Any other questions? Well, I think we've had a great discussion. You can see a lot of the challenges that are out there, but also a lot of the opportunities that are out there for South Korea. And as things move forward, we can also see that Dr. Kane and Miles Pomper are 2 great experts that we can always turn to talk to us about these things. So let's give them a great round of applause.